James Edward Susie, Roland's oldest son. And Mark, Heather, and I would like to thank you for being here to celebrate the life of our father, Roland Susie. I spent hours going over what I was going to say here today, trying to think of all the stories I could tell you about Roland. And I think it was probably an hour or 2 hours that it would be if I would be standing here telling you all the stories. So I figured I'd tell you a little bit about Roland's life, and I'd tell you the impact he had on our lives. Let me state at the start that our father was the strongest man we ever met, and the most loving father 3 kids could have. Dad was very charming, and he's usually the smartest guy in any room, if you guys know about Dad. Dad was born on 11/28/38. Dad didn't talk about his childhood much to us and stuff, and we learned a lot later in life about some things and stuff, but one of the important things that I found out is Dad had a paper route at 7 years old. And on that paper route, he noticed these houses that had antennas on the side of the house, these large antennas, and he asked the people in there what they were. And he learned that they were ham radios or amateur radios. And they were people, and they could talk people all around the world. You know, and that really interested my dad. And he became friends with these people. And at 7 years old, my dad got his ham radio license. You know, and his license was N6WQ, which is, any license is 4 letters and numbers. And later on in life, that N6WQ took on a different meaning for us. And when I get to that part of the story, I'll tell you why. But during these years, Dad became very interested in planes, you know, building model planes, building model cars, you know, and you'll see in a lot of the pics here, there's a pic of Dad when he's 7 years old at the top over there. He's 7 years old in front of his ham radio setup. A lot of people don't know, Dad only went to school through the 10th grade. He didn't finish high school. And considering what he accomplished in life, Dad told us a story about how he joined the Navy when he was 17 years old. And I guess for years I just thought that was BS, you know. Nobody joins when they're 17 and stuff. And going through his papers and his military paperwork, you know, his birthday's November 28th. He signed up July 8th of 1956. So he was 17 and a half. His mom had to sign for him to go into the Navy. And so he did. He told him, you know, 17 years old, he's in the Navy. The Navy taught my dad a lot about things that were going to serve him well for the rest of his life. He learned about honor, teamwork, leadership, self-reliance, resilience, and family. Dad got out of the Navy in 1960 and started working in Boston. And a friend set him up on a blind date with a pretty girl who was a nurse in Boston. Dad showed up in a sports car, an Austin Healey. The nurse didn't have a chance with his good looks, piercing blue eyes, and a sports car. That nurse's name was Iona. She was our future mom. I believe today that if Dad hadn't showed up in that sports car, I wouldn't be talking to you. So, Mom had standards. They got married in 1961, and over the course of the next 5 years, me, Mark, and Heather were born. We lived in Rhode Island until about 1968. During this time, we got the first of many Beagles in our family's heritage. Sammy Beagle came along, and you'll see we had many Beagles over the years. Only one at a time, but we had a lot of Beagles. Dad was offered a job in Orange County, California, and then we moved to Costa Mesa, where they stayed for about the next 30 years. Him and Mom developed a lot of long-lasting relationships over those 30 years. Some of those people are here today. In 1970, Dad was brought on to be the head of an engineering for an upstarting electronics firm called Standard Electronics. 4 years later, he was promoted to vice a kid from Haverhill, Massachusetts, who didn't graduate high school, is now a VP of a large company. Way to go, Dad. During his 10 years as VP, Dad traveled around the world. He had many trips to New Zealand, England, Japan, and Taiwan. Dad made many long-lasting friendships during his times and travels across the sea. During this time in the 70s, Dad continued his love of ham radio, sometimes to our demise. And what I mean by that is, back in the 70s, there's no cable or direct TV or anything like that. You just have antennas on your roof. So Dad had a 75-foot antenna on the side of the house. And when you start up your ham radio and stuff, if you're watching your football game on Sunday or watching your soap opera, you know, you get lines. You remember the lines through your TV in the 70s and stuff? You would get that, and people soon found out the guy with the tower, that's that. And then, you know, and Dad would go, don't answer the door, don't answer the door. Okay. But one thing we heard going through the house all the time with my dad was when you have that ham radio license, N6WQ, you don't say this is N6WQ. You have to come up with words and numbers for it. So what we heard throughout the 70s was November 6th, Whiskey Queen. November 6th, Whiskey Queen, who do I have here? And my dad would be talking to somebody in Japan and get their call letters. But it was just November 6th, Whiskey Queen. And I don't have a great story how my dad came up with that, but I'm just thinking somewhere in the Navy on some port, you know what I mean? He came up with November 6th, Whiskey Queen or something like that, but we heard that all the time, November 6th, Whiskey Queen. Dad also continued his love of flying remote control airplanes, driving fast cars. During this time, he had a couple Lotuses, a Lotus Europa, Lotus Esprit. A lot of people don't know that Dad got his pilot's license. He was interested in flying. In the old Orange County Airport, before there were jets, it was a regular airport. Dad used to rent Cessna airplanes out there. He got his license, and probably 3 or 4 times we were flown out to the desert to see air shows in the desert or wherever it was. When he had retesting, you know, he would take, you know, me or Mark up there with him and do the retesting with him. But he had his pilot's license, and we were so proud of him for that. But just interesting. He also got a boat in the 70s. You know, we were out of Embarcadillo Bay in San Juan and stuff, and we used to head out to Catalina. You know, if you've ever seen a dog with their head out the window, you know, and that look they have on their face, my dad on that boat, you know, there'd be choppy water, and he didn't care. He would just be humming on the waves, heading out to Catalina, and he would just stand up there in the wind, and he was just like a dog in the, you know, his head in the window, and we're like getting sick, you know, at the bottom. We also had probably 2 or 3 more Beagles during that time in Costa Mesa. In approximately 1985, Dad was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. How did Dad face this? He faced it bravely. He volunteered to be a test patient for new drugs, being tested for MS patients through the Scripps Clinic in La Jolla, California. He drove down there every month. He took shots every day, but he drove down there every month and was tested, you know, like a guinea pig for these new drugs, interferon, whatever and stuff, because he wanted to be part of healing and part of, you know, finding a cure for multiple sclerosis. Over the years, the disease took effect on him, and Dad went from using a cane, then a walker, a mobility cart, and eventually the electric wheelchair. Dad continued to work during this time, never called in sick. Never called in sick. He had mornings where he couldn't get up. He was helped out of bed by somebody who picked him up from work, but he got in the car and he got to work. In 1993, his first grandson, Drew, was born. And in 1995, his second grandson was born, Brandon. He loved them both so much. Brandon and Drew call him Beep Beep because they would sit on his motorized cart and press his horn, and it made a beep beep sound. They just called him Beep Beep. And to this day, you know, it turned into beeps. When they call him, it's hey beeps. You know, it just stuck with him, not grandpa, nothing, it's beeps. Dad's condition forced him to retire in 1998. They sold their house in Costa Mesa and built a home in a quiet coastal community called Cambria up north. They had taken trips there many years before and felt this was the place they wanted to retire. They built a house up there that accommodated Dad's needs. What an accomplishment, you know, to do all that and be able to retire where you want and build a house that can take care of your needs. So proud of him. During his time up in Cambria, Dad was very involved up there. He was part of the ham radio club, of course, and he organized that. It was an emergency club where, so if there was an emergency and the power went out, the ham radio people would get on there and figure out how they're going to save everybody. Dad had a website called CambriaPCman.com. He fixed everybody's computers. You know, and at this point, my dad had one good hand. He fixed computers for local businesses, for people there. They would drop the computers off at his house. He would fix them, and they would come pick them up. But you go to Cambria PC Man, he'd fix your computers. He also managed websites for high-performance car parts, you know, like Lamborghinis, Porsches, things. They would send my dad the information. He would organize it on a web page for them. You know, it was out of Monterey at the time, but he did that. He's a proud member of the Cambria American Legion. And had many Sunday dinners at the vet hall up in Cambria. And they continued their love of beagles and had a few more beagles up in Cambria. Dad also in 2002 bought a van and had it retrofitted so he could drive it. You know, the ramp would come down and he would get in there and he would drive the van. And he would take himself to his own appointments, his own physical therapy appointments, do his own shopping. Our mom passed away in 2012, and that was a sad day. But we were all worried about Dad. Would he be able to even continue? We all hear about stories where when your loved one passes, your spouse passes, the other one gives up hope and things like that. We were very worried about Dad. Me, Mark, and Heather drove out there, and we were with Dad for probably the first month, taking turns, taking vacation from work to be up there. You know, and it was a tough transition for Dad, but Dad only became stronger and more focused on being healthy and maintaining the lifestyle he had worked so hard for. Dad was able to maintain living by himself for 10 more years in Cambria. He had the help of a fantastic couple named Chuck and Sandra, who in the mornings would come have breakfast with him and maybe set his clothing going, you know, things like that. But during the day, the dad was on, they would go to their regular jobs, and then at night they would come back and have dinner with Dad. One of them would have dinner with Dad. You know what I mean? Put on his pressure socks, what he needed and stuff medical-wise. But I mean, he was able to get by 10 years, you know, with the help of these fantastic people. But Dad still drove his van every week to physical therapy appointments. He did all his grocery shopping by himself. Just what a strong man. In 2022, Dad had a medical emergency that he could no longer get the level of care that he needed in Cambria. We got Dad to make the hard decision to come back to Orange County, where there was family and better options for health care. Mark and I and Heather looked for many assisted living places for Dad because the kind of care he needed, he couldn't live with us, unfortunately. And we found one place in particular named Belmont Village in Aliso Viejo, and it was just so good to have Dad close with us at this time. Dad continued to work on his health and develop new friendships, meaningful relationships at Belmont. He also made friends with some of the great staff. Some of those people are here today. We brought the van down from Cambria and put a driver's seat in it. And me, Mark, Heather, and Heather's husband, John, you know, we had a van now that where Dad could get away from Belmont. We could take him out to dinner, take him over to our houses, family events, things like that, get him out. Because as much as he enjoyed and we feel lucky, we found Belmont for him to stay at. You know, he loved getting out and seeing, you know, his friends, you know, that he had in Costa Mesa, Orange County and stuff, and just hanging out with his kids, you know, going out to lunch. It was great. Dad became ill on July 4th this year. He passed on July 31st. Now, what impact did Dad have on us? I got this. this. First thing that Dad taught us, and it's as much as Mom taught us this as well, is that family. Being a family is a responsibility. You have to work at it. You have to nurture it. As kids, even through high school, we had to be home by 5:30 every night because we had dinner as a family. Not just eating stuff, Mom and Dad, we had to talk about our day, what we're doing, who we were seeing. They want to know what was going on, They weren't going to wait for the internet to come around and check on you that way and stuff. They want to know what was going on. But that built family, it built responsibility that, you learn that you have to be tight as a family. We grew up as kids, me and Mark and Heather, thinking, we were aliens in this family, Every couple of years, Mom and Dad would get us together, we'd have family pictures, we'd go out to a park, and we'd take all these pictures. Some of them are around here today. They're really kind of funny, but people would look at us like we're aliens. What are you guys doing? You know what I mean? We're like, we're taking family pictures, But as we got older, we see families that lose touch with each other. Brothers and sisters don't talk. Mothers and daughters, mothers and sons don't talk. You know what I mean? And that's sad. And we've been lucky all these years that we're still very close. And I think what shook the most is, when my dad was in hospice the last week, me, Mark, and Heather with Dad 24/7. Mark stayed overnight with my dad, and me and Heather took day shifts. So we were always with Dad, talking to him, because he could hear us. He knew what was going on. And a lot of the times we just overlapped, and all three of us were there. We just stayed. We just stayed with Dad. I think that's a sign that he showed us how to be in a family and how to continue it. And I'm just proud that me, Mark, and Heather, and our families are so close. Another thing that he instilled in us was work ethic, and my mom as well. I worked with the same company for 41 years. Mark worked with the same company for 31 years. Heather's worked the last 35 years for 3 companies, but for the last 17 years, she's been an executive with a large promotional advertising company and is very successful. Heather refers to me as the Costco brother. Heather refers to Mark as the FedEx brother, because that's where we worked. Me and Mark are very fortunate. We retired this year in January, and we got to spend a lot of time with Dad in the last few months, so it was just awesome. But his work ethic was just unbelievable. We thought about him and, just his perspective on things. I have something called tinnitus where my ears are always ringing, and, that was kind of difficult when it first started to happen and stuff. And talking to my dad one day, talking about it, I guess I was complaining about it, and he goes, "Hey, I'll take your ears if I can have your legs," And so he just had a way of putting things in perspective. I'm like, okay, do not complain. Do not complain. Be happy with what you have. One of the most important things Dad brought into our life was music. Now, our mom is a classically trained pianist, and so there was always music in our house, but Dad brought live music into our lives. In 1966, Dad was working in Rhode Island, but was taken he had a work trip to Philadelphia in 1966. And so they were on a day off, and Dad asked, "What's there to do in town?" And somebody told him that the Beatles were in town at JFK Stadium. So Dad went by himself and saw the Beatles live in 1966. He talked to me about that and told me that he really couldn't hear crap in the play because people were, all the girls were yelling and screaming and stuff like that. But Dad said the event was like electric. He said it was just like a conscious there, of people there, celebrating something. And he just loved the buzz of being at that concert. In the 70s, our parents had taken us to New York, and we saw like the original Annie production in Broadway, you know what I mean? And that, we remember that to this day. I can sing every song from that, you know. But it took us to musicals in LA and stuff, and we kind of, you know, we enjoyed that. My parents took me to the Greek Theater, and I saw Neil Diamond in like 1976. I saw Barry Manilow, Tony Orlando and Dawn, if any of you remember who they are. You know, but the thing that really cemented it for us is on November 1st, 1980, Dad got us all in the car and took us to Anaheim Convention Center, and we saw Elton John. It was just, I mean, it was an amazing night. I mean, we still remember that. And over the years, as a family, we've gone and seen Elton 5 or 6 times throughout the years. It's kind of our thing. You know, we also went as a family and saw Neil Diamond, you know, many years back. It was just amazing, you know, that what he brought to us, you know what I mean? And to this day, me, Mark, and Heather, I mean, we spent half our years in the 80s at concerts, but we still go to concerts to this day. Me and Heather went last week to a concert. We got more coming up, but we just enjoy it just like my dad did. It's just like, it's a gathering. It's not just music. It's a, you know, people getting together and enjoying something. It's just great. Now, there's a lot more I can say about my dad, but I'm going to close with, when we were going through my dad's, he has a lockbox. Some of my parents had a lockbox where they kept their passports, important papers, jewelry, and stuff. So, you know, after Dad passed, we had to go through this lockbox, you know, looking for things. And at the bottom of it was this piece of paper. And it didn't have a title on it, and I researched it. And, you know, after I read it, I'm like, there's a reason this is in this lockbox. You know, I don't know which of my parents put it in there, but they both know about it, and it had to mean something to them both to have it in there. And what's on here is written on the inside of your handouts that you have there. And it's something by a man named Scott Holland. Henry Scott Holland, who lived from 1847 to 1918. He was a Regius professor at divinity at the University of Oxford. And he wrote this passage, and it's called Death is Nothing at All. And I know you can read it there, but I think my dad would appreciate it being read out loud. Death is nothing at all. It does not count. I've only slipped away into the next room. Nothing has happened. Everything remains as it was. I am I, and you are you. The old life that we lived so fondly together is untouched, unchanged. Whatever we were to each other, that we are still. Call me by my old familiar name. Speak of me in the easy way in which you always used. Put no difference in your tone. Wear no forced air, solemnity, or sorrow. Laugh as we always laughed at the little jokes we enjoyed together. Play, smile, think of me, pray for me. Let my name be the household word it always was. Let it be spoken without effort, without the ghost or shadow upon it. Life is all it ever meant. It is the same as it ever was. There is absolute and unbroken continuity. What is death but a negligible accident? Why should I be out of mind because I'm out of sight? I am but waiting for you for an interval, somewhere very near, just around the corner. All is well, nothing is hurt, nothing is lost. One brief moment, and all will be as it was before. How we shall laugh at the trouble of parting when we meet again. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim.